The penalty kick in soccer is somewhat like a free throw in basketball, especially a late game free throw in basketball, because it's the one time in the game when play is stopped. And it really becomes more of a closed skill than an open skill. PK is a little bit different because you do have a goalie who can move and defend the shot versus a free throw, where there's no defense. So there are certainly differences there. But most soccer people would say that if you take a well taken penalty, you should score. Most of the time, just as with a free throw. If you shoot a free throw correctly, there's no defense there. You should score most of the time. And it's also an instance of great pressure because you're expected to score on a PK. Similarly, on a free throw, you're expected to make a free throw. That's why it's called a free throw. So, I was just watching Tottenham Liverpool this morning, and Liverpool steps up to take a penalty, and James Milner goes up, and the analyst is talking about how they have so many attacking players, but they let Milner take it. And then they go on and they start talking about how Milner had a great reputation in terms of practice success with the national team, and the analyst comes back and says, well, I don't know how important that is. I know I played with players, who would be 10 for 10 in practice and then 5 for 10 in games, because you just can't replicate, the pressure of a game situation. And, the the technique of a penalty kick really isn't that hard. As the analyst said, it's basically passing the ball into the net, and in every practice you pass the ball hundreds, maybe thousands of times in a practice, and this is essentially just the same technique. So he mentioned you could practice technique, just to get a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident with it, but really it's going to be different taking a penalty kick during practice and taking a penalty kick during the game because of the pressure of the situation. And so to me, free throws is a little bit the same way. So you can practice free throws in practice, and you can shoot and practice your technique from the free throw line, and certainly develop some more competence and some more confidence shooting from the free throw line. But those late game free throws are going to be very different because of the pressure of the situation, and it's nearly impossible to replicate that pressure during practice as it is, as there will be during games. And the same with the PKs, and I know coaches, will make you run if you miss, or you have to do push-ups if you miss, and there's all kinds of different things that coaches use to try to create some pressure. But I found, I remember one team years ago that players knew that they were poor free throw shooters, and so they knew, if we were shooting X amount of free throws and you had to run for every miss or something, let's say we were shooting 10 free throws, and if you missed more than 3, you had to run an up back for every single one, that you missed, if you were below 70%. Bad free throw shooters would just get it in their head, okay, well, I'm going to have to run 2 or 3 up backs, and they would prepare themselves for it mentally, and so now the punishment doesn't really have that much of a negative effect because they know that they can run 2 or 3 up backs, without a problem. It's not going to tax them. It's not going to hurt them. There's no real pain involved in those extra sprints. It might be more taxing mentally if they don't know what the punishment would be, and maybe the punishment would be running 20 up backs for every missed shot, and so maybe that would cause a little bit more anxiety and a little bit more tension when shooting those last free throws. But still, in a practice situation, it's going to be something that the coach is not going to do something and go too far. It's going to be minimal penalty, both physically and mentally and emotionally, compared to the emotional expense of potentially missing a game-winning free throw. That's going to have a much bigger emotional toll on a player than missing one in practice and having to run 10 or 15, even suicides. You can prepare yourself mentally for that physical toll, and that you can handle that physical toll. But it's the emotional toll of missing that is, harder to prepare for, and harder to handle when it happens. And so they're not those practice, regardless of what the penalty is, that practice free throw, just can't replicate, the pressure and the environment in which you're shooting, and ultimately the task constraints of it as well, in terms of the score and the time, and then the environment, the pressure of the game situation. So the best thing that we can do as a player is try to create resiliency for those situations. Create mistake responses. So what happens when you make a mistake? How can you forget about that mistake and move on? How can you handle adversity and move on? And so rather than focusing on just shooting free throws under pressure and what we're going to do in that situation, really it's more about creating a resilient and more adaptive athlete, just in terms of their basic psychology and mental skills and mental preparation. And so really to prepare for these situations, whether it's a PK in soccer or a free throw in basketball, it's really more about the general psychological skills that you develop in a player, and making that player resilient, resistant to the pressure, somebody who's willing to embrace the challenge, willing to embrace taking the big shot. I know I when I was helping an old player try to get a college scholarship, she had missed the shot as a sophomore. She had missed the shot that would have won the section championship for her high school. And so I thought that was a positive, because as a sophomore on a senior team, she was the one that wanted to step up and take the big shot at the end of the game. And she missed, but it proved to be kind of a precursor to her success, because she did ultimately win a section championship in high school, and she did go on and do very, very well in college. So to me, it showed the personality of a player who wanted to take the big shot and who could rebound and be resilient when missing that shot, when she was willing to accept all the pressure, and missing didn't cause her to crumble. She continued to move forward and used it to motivate her as she went into her off season and subsequent seasons. So those are the kind of psychological skills that we need to develop in players to be able to succeed in these high pressure situations. And so trying to prevent players from facing these situations and taking away consequence of winning and losing, things like this that we tend to do now in youth sports to try to improve self-esteem, may have negative consequences in terms of developing adaptive athletes and developing resilient athletes, and really teaching players how to rebound from mistakes and how to handle winning and losing, and some of the important psychological skills that we talk about, not just in terms of becoming a better basketball player, a better soccer player, but also when we talk about using sports to develop life lessons or to develop success in other areas of life. And so we really need to think about how we can structure leagues. Obviously we don't want to be damaging to players' self-esteem either, but how can we structure situations and environments where we can develop these psychological skills so that players can be resilient, they can embrace the pressure, they can embrace the challenge, and then if things don't go their way, they have a positive mistake response so that they stay in the game, and they stay focused on the next task, as opposed to allowing a mistake, and ruminating on that mistake and taking themselves out of the game mentally. Okay, so once I make a mistake, there's nothing I can do about it. I've missed the PK, I've missed the free throw. That play is over. I have to concentrate on the next play. And so how can I teach players this mistake response, or a positive mistake response, so they can be more adaptive in these situations, and they're able to continue playing and stay mentally in the game and mentally focused on the next play.